Why did they always underestimate her silence? Maybe it was because Cooper never tried to dominate the room. She listened more than she spoke, kept her hands steady, eyes sharper than anyone cared to notice. At the briefing table, commanders looked at Martinez, not her. The SEALs joked, planned, scribbled maps on notepads, had leaned back in her chair, expression unreadable, like she already knew what was waiting for them, but she had kept quiet. Why tell them the thought that kept crawling through her mind? That the mission felt wrong, the intelligence too thin, the air too heavy with something unspoken. She sipped stale coffee, eyes on the map. A valley in Provence, ridges on both sides, a village tucked against stone, supposed to be a routine recon of a suspected Taliban command post. The intel brief said a dozen fighters at most, maybe a few caches of small arms. Didn't believe it. She had learned after years of Overwatch that nothing in Afghanistan came easy. Nothing ever matched the paper. Still, she kept her doubts locked inside. Because that was her role, see without being seen, speak only when it mattered. She had been doing it long enough that the SEALs called her more than just their sniper. They called her their shadow, and when shadows whispered, people listened. The morning of the operation was bright, almost offensively beautiful. Blue skis stretched over the mountains, the kind of day that would have been perfect for hiking back home in Colorado. But here, beauty meant danger. Clear air carried sound farther. Sunlight revealed movement too easily. Kept low against the rocks as she climbed the ridge, every step measured, boots scuffing against stone that had hidden fighters for centuries. She thought about her husband, Michael, and their son, Jacob. How long had it been since she'd seen them? 5 months, maybe 6. Letters didn't carry weight the way holding your child did. But promises carried weight. She promised Jacob she'd come home. She promised Michael she'd never break. And promises, too, were more binding than any order. From her perch she could see everything. The valley stretched below, a bowl of dust and stone, deceptively calm. Through her scope the village looked asleep. Doors shut, smoke thin from chimneys. No movement, not yet. Martinez and Alpha Team slipped into the valley with textbook precision. 12 men who trusted their steps because they trusted the eyes above them. Steadied her rifle against a boulder, checked wind, adjusted scope. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to a circle of glass and crosshairs. Then it broke. Contact, contact. Martinez's voice exploded over the radio. Gunfire ripped from the ridges opposite. Automatic bursts, muzzle flashes in at least 6 different positions. Alpha Team dove for cover, but it was bad cover. Rocks no thicker than a man's arm, walls that splintered with every hit. Scope snapped to a machine gunner pouring fire down the slope. She exhaled, squeezed. One shot, his body collapsed. Shift. A commander waving his men forward, shouting into the chaos. Shot 2, silence. A flanking squad sliding low along the ridge, trying to cut Alpha off. Shot 3. The man crumpled mid-stride, his momentum carrying him face first into dust. Ghost, suppression south side. They're moving to box us in. Martinez's voice was controlled, clipped, but she could hear the pressure underneath. Already on them, whispered. Her rifle kicked again and again, each shot deliberate, every movement precise. It wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't panic. It was something colder, calm, born of repetition, of hours behind glass, of knowing she was the only line between her brothers and a shallow grave. For 25 minutes she held them. 1 bullet, 1 life. The insurgents started to hesitate, their confidence cracking under the invisible weight of death from above. Alpha Team regrouped, forming a perimeter. For a moment it felt possible. They might claw out of the trap. Then the first mortar whistled. Incoming, someone screamed over comms. The round hit 60 meters from hide, the earth shuddering, dirt raining into her scope. She blinked, cleared her, second mortar, closer. The sound was too clean, too practiced. They weren't aiming for Alpha. They were aiming for her. Her stomach turned cold. They'd learned. Ghost report, Martinez shouted. Another whistle, sharper, nearer. The impact swallowed everything. Rock shattered, fire roared, felt herself lifted, slammed, buried. Sound vanished, replaced by ringing silence. For a heartbeat, she thought it was over, that this was how it ended, not with glory, not even with pain, but with stone pressing down and light ripped away. She didn't know how long she lay there. Minutes, hours. Time dissolved into the weight crushing her chest. Dust filled her mouth. Her hands scrabbled in blackness, finding rifle, scope, bruised skin. Alive. Somehow impossibly alive, but trapped. Through the ringing in her ears, she caught fragments on the radio. Martinez, his voice cracking with something he almost never let through. All stations, Alpha Leader. Be advised, Sniper 27 is KIA. Repeat, Ghost is down. Closed her eyes. KIA. She'd been buried before, not under rock but under assumption. Every time she'd been overlooked at the briefing table, every time someone assumed her silence meant weakness. She had learned to live with being underestimated, but being written off as dead, that was different. She thought of Jacob, of Michael, of the promise she'd whispered into her son's hair the night before she left. Mommy always comes home. She couldn't break that. She wouldn't. With bleeding fingers, she clawed at the rubble. Stone scraped skin, nails cracked. She dug until she could feel air on her face, until a sliver of light pierced through. The hole was no bigger than a fist, but through it she could see the valley. She could see Alpha Team's position, pinned, desperate men she had promised to guard. And beyond them, dozens of insurgents closing in with the arrogance of those who believed the sniper was gone. Her hands shook as she keyed the radio. Alpha Team, this is Ghost. I have eyes on your position. 3 shots, 3 kills, stay low. Silence, then Martinez, disbelief wrapped in hope. Ghost, is that actually you? Affirmative, Alpha Leader. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. I've got clear lines. Give me targets. She adjusted her scope against the jagged hole in the rock. The angle was impossible, the sight picture broken by fragments. But impossibility was just another word for difficult, and Cooper had made a career out of the impossible. 2 o'clock, Martinez barked. Squad leaders 500 meters. Through her fractured window she found them. 3 commanders standing together, pointing toward Alpha's position. So confident, so unaware. I see them, she whispered. Stand by. She let her breath fade, felt her heartbeat in her cheek against the stock. Then crack. The first commander fell, skull snapped back, body folding like cloth. Panic rippled through the fighters. They dove, scrambled, eyes searching everywhere but the rubble pile they believed already destroyed. Didn't pause. 12 seconds later, crack. The second dropped. Martinez's voice rose on the net. They don't know where she is. Hold position. The third shot ended it. Leaders gone, the assault shattered. Chaos spread like wildfire, the insurgents suddenly prey to a predator they thought buried. Targets down, said quietly. Alpha Team, you have 90 seconds. Move to extraction, Charlie, now. Martinez didn't hesitate. Alpha bound in cover. Move, move, move. Fired again and again, each shot buying them another heartbeat. She didn't think about the odds, didn't think about how many were out there. She thought only of her brothers running and the promise she had sworn to keep. But in the back of her mind, a single question burned. How much longer could she hold out before the rocks, the ammo, or fate itself closed in for good? How long could one person hold back an army? Didn't know. She only knew she didn't have a choice. The hole she'd carved through the rock was crude, barely wide enough to see. Every time she shifted, stone cut into her elbows, sharp edges pressing her ribs. Dust coated her throat, stung her eyes, clung to the sweat on her skin. But the rifle was steady, the scope unbroken, and as long as those 2 truths held, she was still Ghost. The insurgents didn't understand what was happening. They thought the Americans had summoned something impossible. A phantom with a rifle. Every shot from the rubble made them pause, hesitate, stumble backward. It gave Alpha Team the seconds they needed to bound and cover, one man sprinting, another laying down fire, leapfrogging their way through terrain that was supposed to kill them. Whispered counts into the radio. 6 on your left, 2 moving parallel, One behind the wall, weight gone. Each time her voice crackled through, Alpha adjusted, trusted. It was as if nothing had changed, as if their sniper hadn't been declared dead just an hour before. But knew the truth her brothers didn't. She was running out of time. Her magazine clicked empty. She swapped with fingers raw from stone, hands trembling not from fear but from exhaustion. Each bullet mattered. Each second cost blood. Through her scope she caught one fighter breaking cover, rocket launcher on his shoulder, too close to the seals. She exhaled, fired. The man crumpled before he could aim. Relief swept her chest, sharp and fleeting. Another life saved. Another promise kept. But the enemy was learning. They no longer bunched together, no longer gave her easy shots. They spread, crawled low, tried to flush Alpha Team with weight of numbers. Had to move faster, sharper. Every target a puzzle, every breath a decision. The clock in her head kept ticking. She thought of Jacob again, of the picture he had drawn before she deployed, stick figures, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, the words, "Come back, Mom." Simple lines, but to they weighed more than her rifle. That picture was folded in her breast pocket even now, pressed against her heart under layers of dust and stone. She whispered to it between shots, not prayers exactly, but promises. "I'm still here, I'm not done." Minutes bled into nearly an hour. Alpha was closer to extraction, but still so far. Ammunition dwindled. She counted 12 rounds left, 11 seals alive, a bullet for each maybe, but what about her? "Ghost status?" Martinez asked. "Low ammo, still holding, keep moving." Her voice was calm, flat. She forced it to be. If they heard the tremor under her words, it might shake them, and she couldn't afford that. Through her fractured, she spotted an insurgent creeping with surprising patience, knife in hand, crawling toward where she knew Alpha had ducked behind a crumbling wall. A whisper of movement, easy to miss. Didn't miss. Shot cracked, body dropped, knife clattering on stone. She wondered for a flicker if that man had a son too, a boy who had drawn him a picture before he picked up his weapon. The thought carved through her, raw and unwanted. She shoved it aside. She couldn't carry both their stories. She could barely carry her own. The sky darkened with smoke. Choppers would have to fight to get in. Extraction felt like an idea more than a guarantee. And then came the moment she had dreaded. Click empty, no magazines left. Her breath froze. She looked at the rifle, her partner now mute. She checked again, hoping somehow she had missed one last round. Nothing. The silence of the weapon pressed harder than the rocks around her. For a heartbeat, despair coiled in her chest. This was it, the wall had come. Then her hand fell on the sidearm. 9 rounds. Not built for distance, not meant for this kind of war, but it was something. She wedged herself, angled her body to catch narrow slits of sight. Each shot demanded impossibility, handgun range at targets meant for a sniper's glass. But Ghost had built her life on impossibility. She fired. The recoil slammed harder in her cramped space. One target dropped, another wounded. She fired again, teeth gritted, each trigger pull an act of refusal. 8 rounds. 7. 6. Her ears rang, the confined blasts punishing, but she kept going. When the pistol clicked empty, she didn't stop. She reached for grenades clipped to her vest. She pulled pins with bleeding fingers, rolled them through cracks, felt the earth shake as blasts swallowed fighters who thought they had found her. When the grenades were gone, she was left with nothing but the radio and her voice. Alpha Team, 2 squads regrouping East Ridge, 30 seconds. Martinez didn't question how she knew. He never did. He trusted her eyes, even buried, even broken. As Alpha neared extraction, sagged against the stone, chest heaving, lungs tight. Her body screamed, but her mind refused. She wouldn't stop. Not until they were safe. "Ghost, this is Falcon. We're at Charlie. Bird inbound. What's your status?" She looked at her cave, collapsed, sealed, only her carved slit of vision keeping her in the fight. No ammo, no way out. "Alpha Leader, I'm in a non-viable position for extraction. Continue mission. Silence. Negative ghost. We don't leave anyone behind. Closed her eyes. She could hear Jacob's laugh in her memory, Michael's voice telling her to come home. She wanted that more than anything, but she knew what the mission demanded. Alpha leader, you've got 12 operators who need to get home to their families. I've got maybe 40 minutes before they dig me out. Get out of here. Martinez didn't reply right away. The pause was heavy, filled with something unspoken: guilt, anger, sorrow. Finally, his voice cracked through. We will come back for you. Swallowed hard. Her throat was raw, but her words came steady. I know you will, Falcon. Tell Michael I kept my promise. Tell Jacob, tell him Ghost always comes home, even when she's supposed to be dead. The whir of helicopter blades echoed faintly in the valley. The sound of salvation, for them, not for her. She laid her head back against the stone, closing her burning eyes as dust sifted around her. For the first time since the ambush began, she let her hands fall from the rifle. Not in surrender, never that. In waiting. Outside, the seals lifted away, carried toward life. Inside the rubble, Ghost remained, her body bruised, her spirit unbroken, her promise intact. And as darkness settled heavier, she wondered one thing she couldn't silence. Was this what keeping her word would cost? What does silence sound like when you know no one is coming back? For it was heavier than the stone pressing on her chest. The helicopter's distant blades had faded, leaving only the faint drip of dust sliding through cracks. The gunfire had grown quiet, too, replaced by the muted shuffle of fighters regrouping in the valley. She lay still, cheek pressed to grit, chest rising against rubble that barely gave space for air. Pain throbbed through her ribs, every breath scratched, but she counted breaths anyway. 1, 2, 3. Not because it made the hurt smaller, but because it gave her something to hold on to. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't always about action. Sometimes it was about waiting, about believing in the space between breaths. She tried her radio, static hissed back. Alpha was gone, out of range. She was truly alone. Her hands ached from digging. Nails cracked, palms raw. She tried again, clawing at rock, but the cave didn't yield. The mortar had sealed her tomb too well. Still, she didn't stop. Each scrape of her fingers was another refusal to surrender. Blood smeared stone. Dust filled her cuts. She didn't care. Minutes blurred into hours. Her throat was so dry she could barely swallow. She licked grit from her lips, tasting metal and dirt. Her eyes stung. The hole she'd carved for her scope was still there, her lifeline to the world outside. Through it she saw movement now and then, fighters dragging their dead, regrouping, retreating. They were afraid. Ghost was still out there, and fear was sometimes more powerful than bullets. Her mind drifted to Michael, to Jacob, to the way her son had pressed his hand against the car window when she left, his palms small and warm against the glass. She had smiled that day, pretended everything was fine, but inside her heart had cracked. She had whispered a promise into his ear before boarding the plane. I'll come back, always. Promises, they were the weight she carried more than any rifle. Hours passed, or maybe just one. Time had broken here inside the stone. She thought about the word dead, how Martinez had spoken it into the radio with such finality. Sniper 27 is KIA. It should have hurt, but instead it lit something in her chest, because she was, not yet. And as long as she could still whisper, still dig, still breathe, she wasn't finished. A faint shuffle broke the silence. Stilled, listening, the scrape of boots on rock, voices in Pashto. She understood enough to catch fragments. Search the rubble, find the sniper. Her pulse quickened. They were coming, not to rescue, to confirm the kill. She gripped her pistol, though it was empty, fingers wrapping cold steel anyway. Comfort, not weapon. The footsteps came closer. Shadows passed across her slit of vision. Hands clawed at the rubble above her. She could hear stones shifting. They were digging. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to fight, but she held her breath, waited. Dust fell in her hair. A crowbar struck rock inches from her skull, her muscles tensed like wire. Then instinct took over. She snatched the only thing left, an empty magazine, and hurled it through the gap. It clattered in the dirt outside. The fighters cursed, startled, diving back as if she'd thrown something worse. She used the moment to shove hard against the rock, collapsing more dust, forcing them to retreat. Silence again. Her chest rose in ragged relief. She had bought minutes, nothing more. But sometimes minutes were everything. Her body shook now. Fatigue setting deep, bruises screaming, head pounding. She wanted to close her eyes to let the darkness claim her. But Jacob's picture pressed against her ribs, stiff with sweat. She touched it through her vest, fingers trembling. "Not yet," she whispered. Night fell. She knew because the light through the crack dimmed to black. Cold seeped in, sharper than before. Her teeth chattered against grit. She tried to sleep, but every sound jolted her awake. In the silence, memories bled through. Her father teaching her to shoot tin cans at 12, telling her steady hands made steady lives. Her mother braiding her hair before boot camp, saying, "Don't let them forget you're more than a soldier." But here in the rubble she wasn't sure who she was anymore. A sniper, a mother, a ghost, maybe all three. Her radio crackled suddenly. A faint burst, half-broken words. She snatched it up, pressing it to her ear. "Ranger element moving on villagey sunrise." Static swallowed the rest. Her chest surged. Rescue, or just another unit passing by? She didn't know, she couldn't know, but it was enough. Hope, fragile as glass, lodged in her lungs. She dug again, fingers raw, wrists shaking. She widened her slit of vision until she could see the horizon faintly glowing with dawn, the sky turning pale. Then came the voices again, different this time, not insurgents. Commands shouted in English, heavy boots pounding earth. Gunfire crackled, but it was American fire now, precise, controlled. Her breath caught. She wanted to scream, but her throat was too dry, her voice too weak. She keyed her radio, barely whispering. "This is Ghost. Friendly element in the valley, do you copy?" For a moment nothing. Then a voice answered, sharp and clear, "Ghost, say again." Tears stung her eyes. Relief nearly broke her chest open. Alive, buried in position, need extraction. Gunfire thundered closer. Shouts. Then hands, real hands, clawed at the rubble above. Light split the darkness as rocks were heaved away. A face appeared through the dust, a ranger wide-eyed shouting, "We've got her, Ghost is alive." Sagged body trembling, lungs sucking clean air for the first time in hours. She didn't even have strength to raise her hand. When they pulled her free, the world exploded into sound and light. Shouting soldiers, smoke, sun glaring off rifles. She collapsed against arms that lifted her, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Around her, 9 bodies lay sprawled, fighters who had tried to dig her out and paid with their lives. Even without bullets, even buried, she had refused to let them take her. She drifted as medics checked her, voices blurring into static. But before the darkness claimed her, one thought cut sharp and steady through her mind. She had kept her promise. Why did surviving feel heavier than dying? Lay in the hospital bed, white sheets tucked too tight, IV dripping steady. The ceiling above her was blank, a sterile square she'd stared at for hours. Machines hummed. Nurses walked past, murmuring. Her body was bruised, ribs bound, hands wrapped in gauze. She could barely lift her arms. But it wasn't the pain that weighed her down. It was the silence. For 14 hours she had fought inside the rubble. For every one of those hours she had believed she might die. Yet when the rangers dug her out, when the blinding light and shouts of salvation reached her, she hadn't felt joy. She had felt emptiness, as if part of her was still under those rocks, still clawing at stone. Now safe, she wondered, what exactly had she survived for? The door creaked. Martinez entered, uniform crisp despite dust still smudging his boots. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, staring, jaw set. His eyes were darker than usual, shadowed by the weight of decisions leaders never escape. "You died," he finally said. His voice wasn't loud, but it struck her harder than any mortar blast. "For 3 hours, Ghost, I had to believe you were gone. I had to call it over the radio. I had to write your death into the report. Swallowed, her throat burned from dehydration, but she forced words out. But I was. You should been. He sat, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. That ridge collapsed. We saw the fireball. I told your husband you weren't coming home. I told your son. His voice cracked. He cut it off, dragging a hand across his face. Turned her head, eyes burning. And yet here I am. Martinez looked at her then, really looked. You kept us alive. 11 men walked out because of you. But at what cost, Ghost? You nearly broke yourself in half to keep a promise. And the worst part is, I don't think you're done breaking yourself. She didn't answer, because he was right. Later that evening, another visitor came. Michael. His eyes were red, his face pale, as if he'd aged years in the months she'd been gone. He sat gently on the edge of her bed, taking her bandaged hand in both of his. I thought, he trailed off, voice trembling. They told me you were dead. I tried to explain it to Jacob, tried to make him understand. Do you have any idea how hard that was? How do you tell a 6-year-old his mother isn't coming home? Closed her eyes. Tears slipped out, burning trails down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. You promised me, Michael said softly, not angry, just broken. You promised you'd come back, and then I got that call. Do you know what that did to us? What it did to me? Squeezed his hand weakly. But I did come back. Michael shook his head. In body, yes, but are you really here, or are you still on that ridge? She couldn't answer, because part of her still was. The weeks dragged. Physical therapy stretched her limits. Doctors urged her to take extended leave. You need time, they said. Your body's healing, but your mind has been through trauma. Nodded, but inside she disagreed. Trauma wasn't something to recover from. It was something to carry like her rifle. Heavy, but necessary. When Martinez visited again, he carried papers. Training assignment, he said, sliding them onto her bedside table. Stateside, safe. You be teaching the next wave of snipers. No more field, no more ambushes, you've earned that. Stared at the papers. They looked neat, official, final, but something inside her recoiled. Training meant distance. Distance from the team, from the fight, from the promise she still believed she owed. You want me behind a desk, she said flatly. I want you alive, Martinez replied. We need your skills, but we don't need another funeral. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at Jacob's drawing on the bedside table, a stick figure with a rifle, a house, the words, "Come back, Mom." She traced the crayon lines with her fingertip. Her son wanted her home. Her husband wanted her safe. Her commander wanted her alive. So why did her chest ache at the thought of leaving the field? Why did the idea of watching her brothers deploy without her feel like betrayal? The question burned her until dawn. Could she be both mother and ghost? Or did one role demand the death of the other? Days turned to weeks. Physically she healed. Ribs mended. Bruises faded. The scars on her hands remained, ridges of memory. But mentally she walked a tightrope. Every conversation pulled her in two directions, home or war. Michael tried to talk her into choosing him. Jacob needs you, he said one morning, his voice soft but firm. I need you, isn't that enough? Looked at him, eyes hollow. And what about the men still out there? What about Martinez? What about the promises I made to them? Michael's jaw tightened. So you're choosing them over us? It's not a choice, she whispered, but it was, and that truth sliced her. The news reached her eventually. Alpha team back in Afghanistan, missions rolling again, ambushes, firefights. Martinez had sent her a message. We miss our shadow. That was all. But it was enough to ignite the fire in her chest again. One evening, sitting outside the recovery center, watched the sun dip over the horizon. She remembered the mountains, the way the light faded in Provence, how the shadows stretched long. She remembered clawing at stone, whispering promises to a crayon drawing. And she realized something. Survival wasn't her burden, it was her weapon. When Martinez visited the next day, she told him, "I'm coming back." He shook his head. "No, not after." "Yes," she interrupted, voice steady. "You said I nearly broke myself to keep a promise. You're right, but what you don't understand is, that's who I am. That's what I do. And if I stop, then everything I fought for under those rocks means nothing." Martinez studied her long and hard. Finally, he sighed. "Then God help us all, because if Ghost refuses to stay buried, the war just got a new rule book. Why did everyone stare when she walked back onto base? It wasn't the uniform, plenty wore the same. It wasn't the scars, most here had their own. It was the weight of a story whispered across tents and hallways, the sniper who had died but hadn't. Ghost, they called her now, not as a call sign but as something heavier. A myth, a presence. Felt the eyes on her as she crossed the gravel yard, rucksack slung over her shoulder. Some stared with awe, some with disbelief, some with quiet fear. She ignored it, kept her steps measured, back straight. Inside, her chest tightened. Myths couldn't afford to falter. Martinez met her outside the armory. His face didn't change, no smile, no welcome home, just a nod. But in his eyes something softer flickered. "Back from the dead, huh?" Adjusted the strap on her ruck. "I told you, I always come home." "Yeah," Martinez said, "but the question is, are you still, or are you just Ghost now?" She didn't answer, because she wasn't sure anymore. The first mission back was simple on paper: overwatch for a raid on a weapons cache hidden in a remote village. She climbed the ridge before dawn, the weight of her rifle familiar, almost comforting. The mountains smelled the same: dust, cold air, faint smoke from cooking fires. She lay prone, glass sweeping the valley. Alpha moved below, shadows slipping between walls. The old rhythm returned, each step of theirs matched by her steady breaths. But there was something new, something she couldn't ignore. The radio chatter carried reverence. "Ghost, eyes clear. Ghost, we trust you." Every word reminded her she wasn't just anymore, she was a phantom. Expectations pressed against her chest. Perfection wasn't optional, she had to be more than human. She spotted the first sentry, half hidden behind a crumbling wall. One shot, he folded silently. Another appeared, scanning the darkness. She exhaled, squeezed, gone. Martinez's voice came through. "You're still ours." The words caught her. Not praise, not awe, something steadier, belonging. The mission ended without a scratch on Alpha. Back at base, Martinez debriefed, rattling off details. But the SEALs weren't listening. They were watching. One finally broke the silence. "You weren't supposed to be alive, and yet you are. That means something." Cleaned her rifle that night, sitting alone under a dim light. She thought about what something meant. Did it mean destiny? Did it mean she had to carry more than just herself? She stared at her hands, the scars across her knuckles. They looked ordinary, but everyone else saw more. Weeks passed, more missions, more kills, more whispers. The insurgents started calling her Shaitani, the devil of dust. Stories spread, bullets curving from nowhere, men struck down by a sniper buried under mountains, a ghost who could not be killed. Fear rippled through villages. Fighters hesitated before moving into open ground. Commanders changed tactics, paranoid about eyes they couldn't see. But felt the burden sharpen each time she lay behind her scope. She wasn't afraid of failure for herself. She was afraid of breaking the myth. One night Martinez found her sitting outside, rifle across her knees, staring at the horizon. He lit a cigarette, the glow brief in the dark. "You know they believe you're untouchable," he said. Didn't look at him. "And if I prove them wrong?" Martinez exhaled smoke, watching it drift. "Then they'll learn you're human, but maybe that's what they need. A reminder that legends are built on flesh and blood." Finally turned. "And what if I don't want to be a legend?" Martinez's eyes softened. "Then just keep doing what you've always done. One shot, one promise at a time. Let the rest take care of itself." But she couldn't ignore the shift. During firefights, SEALs moved with bolder confidence, knowing Ghost was above. During debriefs, commanders leaned heavier on her judgment. Even allied units requested her presence, as if her shadow alone could shield them. She remembered Michael's voice. "Are you really here, or are you still on that ridge?" And Jacob's drawing tucked in her pack. She was here, yes, but she was also still buried, always clawing her way out, proving she wasn't finished. On her seventh mission back, Alpha walked into another ambush. Rockets streaked across the valley, walls crumbling under fire. Scope lit with chaos, fighters pouring from alleys, shadows swarming. Her rifle spoke, crack, 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 but there were too many, even she couldn't stop them all. Martinez's voice cut in. Ghost were surrounded, options. Scanned, heart hammering. There, a fuel cache stacked near a mud brick house. Risky, dangerous, but it could break the assault. "Take cover," she ordered, "now." The SEALs ducked. Shot ignited the cache. Fire bloomed, the night roaring, insurgents scattering in panic. Alpha surged forward, cutting through smoke. Afterward, Martinez confronted her. "That blast could killed us." "But it didn't," replied quietly. His jaw worked. He wanted to argue, but instead he just shook his head. "And that's why they call you Ghost. You do what shouldn't be possible." She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her bunk. She wondered how long she could keep walking this line, between woman and myth, between and ghost. Every shot kept her brothers alive, but every shot carved her deeper into a story she didn't control. She whispered into the dark, not to anyone, not even to God, but to herself. "I'm still, I have to be." But as the weeks rolled on, she wasn't sure anyone believed that anymore. How far could belief carry a person? Wondered that as she lay prone on another, dust biting her throat, her cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle. The valley below was quiet, too quiet. Alpha Team moved with silent precision, but even their shadows seemed cautious. The mission was supposed to be surgical. Extract a high-value target hiding in a compound ringed by stone walls. Intelligence said 20 fighters. Didn't trust the number. She never trusted the numbers anymore. Through her scope she caught subtle tells. A door open where it should been closed. A trail of fresh earth near a wall. The faint glint of glass that didn't belong. Her gut twisted. "Falcon," she whispered into the comms, "it's a trap." Martinez's reply came calm, steady. "How bad?" She swallowed. "Worse than." The words landed heavy. Alpha adjusted immediately, fanning wider, rifles raised. But before they could reposition, the valley erupted. Machine gun fire poured from rooftops. RPGs streaked against the night. The compound walls burst open with fighters flooding out. Alpha dove for cover. Scope flared with targets. She fired. 1, 2, 3. Each fell, but more surged. The insurgents were disciplined, coordinated, not reckless villagers. This was planned, practiced. "Ghost, we need suppression west wall." "Copy." She swung her rifle, squeezing between breaths. 3 more dropped, but the line didn't break. For 30 minutes she poured herself into the fight. Her accuracy was flawless, each shot saving a man below, but the pressure mounted. The enemy was adapting, circling, testing. They wanted Ghost. They wanted the myth. And they had brought enough firepower to kill a legend. Mortars boomed again, shaking her ridge. The flashbacks hit hard, the collapse, the suffocating dark, the silence of being buried. Her fingers trembled against the trigger. Her breath caught. For the first time since, fear rooted her. What if it happens again? She clenched her teeth, forcing the thought back. She couldn't afford it, not now. "Ghost status," Martinez pressed. Her voice steadied by willpower alone. Still up, still watching. But inside, doubt whispered. She kept firing, but every shot felt heavier, slower. For the first time she missed, round landing inches from her target. The insurgent ducked, then returned fire. Adjusted, corrected, hit. But the crack in her perfection widened. The radio carried Alpha's faith. "Ghost has us. Ghost always finds a way." And those words burned more than the fear. Because what if she could? What if the myth was bigger than the woman? She thought of Jacob, of the promise she had carried under rock. She thought of Michael's broken voice. Are you really here, or are you still on that ridge? She pressed her cheek harder to the rifle. I'm here, she whispered to herself. I'm here. The enemy shifted, pulling back to regroup. Smoke curled from burning rooftops. Alpha used the pause to drag wounded into cover, scan for patterns, anything to predict their next push. She spotted it, two men sprinting with a heavy pack toward the compound's side wall. Explosives. Her scope locked. Breath in, exhale, squeeze. One down, shift, squeeze. The second fell, detonator slipping from his grasp. The wall held. Alpha lived another minute. But her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded with practiced speed, but her hands shook now, betraying her. For hours the battle raged, fired until her shoulder ached, until her vision blurred. Each shot landed, but each one drained her further. The myth still held, but barely. And then came the moment she feared. Her scope tracked an insurgent slipping behind Alpha's flank, lined up, finger on the trigger, only to realize her angle was wrong. Rocks blocked her. The shot wasn't possible. Her breath hitched. Impossible. But the radio buzzed with Martinez's trust. Ghost, you've got him right. Her hands froze. The myth demanded yes. The human inside whispered no. She shifted desperately, grinding her body against stone, straining for an angle. Pain tore through her ribs. She forced herself, wedging her barrel through a crack that barely fit. Her breath burned. One eye closed, the other fixed through the glass. Crosshairs on target. Crack. The insurgent fell. Sagged, forehead against the stock, chest heaving. She had done it. Barely. But she felt the cost in every bone. The battle dragged into dawn. By the time the extraction bird thundered overhead, Alpha was bloodied but alive. And once again, every one of them credited Ghost. But when they regrouped at base, Martinez found her sitting alone, rifle across her lap, eyes distant. You saved us, he said simply. Shook her head. I almost didn't. For a moment I froze, for a moment I was Ghost. I was just, and that almost cost you. Martinez crouched in front of her, voice firm. Don't you get it yet? That's why you're Ghost. Not because you never fail, not because you're untouchable, because even when you break, you still find a way. That's the real myth. She stared at him, the words sinking deeper than she wanted to admit. Maybe the myth wasn't perfection. Maybe it was persistence. But as she lay awake that night, the doubt still whispered. How long before persistence wasn't enough? What happens when the battlefield no longer needs you, but refuses to forget you? Asked herself that as she stood in front of a classroom of young faces, rows of recruits with rifles across their laps, notebooks open, eyes wide. The Naval Special Warfare Center smelled of oil and polish, of metal and chalk dust. The room was sterile, but the tension was. These men and women weren't here to pass time. They were here because they wanted to learn how to survive, and because she was teaching them. She could feel their stares, not at her scars, not at her uniform, but at the weight of her name. Ghost. Every one of them had heard the story, buried alive. 52 rounds, 49 kills, 11 SEALs saved. A woman who was declared dead but refused to stay buried. They wanted that story to spill from her lips. They wanted to taste the myth. Set her rifle on the table. The same rifle that had been with her in Provence, the one she had cradled under stone, her lifeline when the world tried to seal her away. Anyone can learn to shoot accurately, she began. Her voice was calm, steady, stripped of theatrics. The military will teach you to calculate wind, adjust for distance, squeeze instead of jerk. You'll all learn to hit a target. She paused, letting the silence draw them closer. But that's not what makes a sniper. What makes a sniper is what happens when everything goes wrong, when your hide collapses, when you're out of ammo, when everyone thinks you're dead. Do you stop, or do you find a way? Pens scratched furiously across notebooks. Some recruits leaned forward, hanging on every word. His eyes swept them. The rifle is a tool, but the real weapon is here. she tapped her chest. And here, she touched her temple. If you can't control your fear, if you can't carry the weight of promises, you'll never make it. Because this job isn't about shots, it's about people. Every trigger pull means someone lives or dies, and you need to know before you squeeze that you can carry that for the rest of your life. The room was silent, heavy. After class, recruits swarmed her with questions. Technical ones, emotional ones. What's the farthest shot you ever made? Did you ever miss? What went through your mind when you thought you were buried alive? She answered carefully, never indulging too much in legend. But sometimes she let them glimpse the truth. I wasn't thinking about glory. I was thinking about my son, about how I promised him I'd come home. That's what kept me alive. Not skill, not training, just a promise. The recruits nodded, reverent, but saw it, the spark in their eyes. They weren't just learning tactics, they were absorbing myth. And that frightened her, because she wasn't a ghost. She was flesh and blood and tired. She had doubts, failures, fears. If they built her too high, would they fall when they realized legends bleed? At night, back in her quarters, she sat at her desk with Jacob's drawings spread out before her. Over the years, he had drawn dozens, pictures of soldiers, planes, rifles, and always her. Sometimes smiling, sometimes with a cape, sometimes just standing in front of a house labeled home. Michael had stopped asking her to quit. Their marriage had grown quiet, stretched thin by deployments and absences. He loved her, but he knew now this wasn't just a job for her. It was something deeper, harder to explain. He supported from a distance, raising Jacob, keeping the house warm. Knew she owed him more than silence, but words always failed. So she poured herself into the recruits, into teaching them not just to shoot, but to endure. She built courses around what had saved her, compromised hides, improvised firing positions, shooting through impossible angles. She demonstrated with calm precision, forcing them to see that survival wasn't neat. It was messy, gritty, bloody. But she also taught them about promises. When you go out there, she told them, it's not about killing, it's about keeping your team alive, keeping your word, keeping yourself steady when everyone else is falling apart. The instructors noticed. They started incorporating her lessons into official manuals. Compromise position shooting became doctrine. Emergency hide construction became standard. Her fingerprints spread through the sniper community like ink. And yet inside wrestled with unease. Because the more her story spread, the less it felt like hers. She overheard recruits whispering in mess halls, "She's unkillable. She's more shadow than soldier." But knew the truth. She wasn't unkillable. She had nearly died a dozen times. She wasn't shadow. She was a woman who had clawed through rock because she refused to let her son grow up without a mother, her brothers die without backup. One evening, a recruit named Daniels lingered after class. He was young, barely 20, with nervous hands and wide eyes. "Staff Sergeant Cooper," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Do you ever feel afraid? I mean your ghost, but do you ever feel less than that?" Studied him, she saw herself in his uncertainty. "All the time," she admitted. "Fear never leaves you. The trick isn't to erase it. The trick is to make it smaller than the promise you're keeping. That's what keeps you moving." Daniels nodded, eyes shining as if she had given him a secret. After he left, sat alone in the empty room, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She realized then that maybe this was her mission now. Not the rifle, not the kill count, not the myth, but the truth, teaching them that Ghost wasn't invincible. She was simply relentless. Years passed. Her name appeared in field manuals, training syllabi, whispered in Allied briefings. She became a standard, a reference point. Do it the way Cooper did. Build it the way Ghost built it. And still, she wondered at night, was she passing down herself, or just the shadow of a story too large for one woman to hold? One evening, Martinez called her. His voice was older but still sharp. "Ghost," he said, "do you know what the men still say when they're pinned and they don't know if they'll make it out?" What? She asked. They say wait for the ghost. Even if you're not there, even if it's just a story, they believe it buys them time. Hope is its own weapon. Sat in silence, phone against her ear, staring at Jacob's latest drawing on the desk. It was of her again, but this time she wasn't carrying a rifle. She was standing between him and a shadowy figure shielding him. Maybe that was what she had become. Not a myth, not even just a sniper, but a shield. And maybe, she thought, that was enough. What does it mean to step away from a life that defined you? Asked herself that on the morning of her retirement ceremony. 5 years had passed since the province battle. 5 years since rock and fire had tried to bury her. 5 years since she had crawled back into the world with nothing but a promise and a rifle. Now she stood on a parade deck, dress uniform pressed, medals gleaming under the sun. The Navy Cross hung heavy against her chest, but heavier still were the memories it represented. Faces of men who had lived, faces of men who hadn't. The crowd applauded as her name was called. Staff Sergeant Cooper, extraordinary heroism. The words echoed across the speakers, formal, polished, stripped of blood and dust. His eyes found Martinez in the audience. His hair was streaked with gray now, his shoulders broader with age, but his eyes were the same, steady, unreadable, carrying the weight of command and friendship. When the ceremony ended, he found her in the quiet of the hallway. No medals, no speeches, just two soldiers who had shared too much silence under fire. "Ghost," he said softly. She turned, "Falcon." He studied her. "Do you know what I thought about when we buried you, when we thought you were gone?" She shook her head. "I kept thinking about Jacob," he admitted. "I kept asking myself what I would tell him. How do you explain to a boy that his mother died in the dark, saving men he would never meet?" His throat tightened. "But now," Martinez continued, "I realize I had it wrong. I don't need to tell him you died. I need to tell him you lived. That you lived when everyone else thought you couldn't. That you lived because you refused to let promises die in the dirt." Swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "That's the story I'll tell him," Martinez said. "That his mother didn't just save us once. She taught us what it means to keep going when nothing's left." Nodded slowly. Words wouldn't come, they didn't need to. Later at home, she unpacked the box of medals, placing them in a drawer. She didn't need them on the walls. She kept only one thing visible, Jacob's crayon drawing framed above her desk. The same house, the same stick figures, the same words, "Come back, Mom." Jacob was older now, taller, voice changing. He didn't remember every detail of those years, but he remembered waiting. And he remembered that she always came home. Sometimes when she tucked him in, he would ask, "Were you scared?" And would answer honestly, "Yes," every time. "Then how did you do it?" he would whisper. She would smile faintly, brushing his hair back. "Because I promised you, and some promises are heavier than fear." Her story spread far beyond her home. Manuals cited her methods. Instructors quoted her words. Recruits whispered her name before their first missions. Allied forces studied her techniques. Enemy fighters still flinched at the idea of an unseen sniper who could not be killed. But none of that mattered to her as much as the quieter truths. That 11 men went home to their families because she had refused to give up. That her son could still press his hand to hers at the dinner table. That her husband, though by absence, still stood beside her in quiet loyalty. She often sat on the porch at night, the Colorado sky vast above her, stars scattering like tracer rounds across the dark. She would close her eyes and hear echoes, the crack of her rifle, the hiss of static on the radio, Martinez's voice calling for Ghost. Sometimes she wondered if she had been defined by war, or by the refusal to let it define her. When people asked her later in life, "What made you different? Why did you survive when others did?" she always answered the same. "I wasn't different. I wasn't unkillable. I wasn't even the best. I was just the one who refused to stop." When the mountain fell on me, when the radio called me dead, I had a choice. Quit or keep a promise. I chose the promise. She left it at that. Years later, military historians would point to the Provence battle as a turning point in modern sniper doctrine. They would write essays about compromised position tactics, about psychological warfare, about Ghost as a figure of legend. But among the SEALs, among those who had heard her voice through static when they were certain she was gone, the memory was simpler. It wasn't about numbers, it wasn't about kills, it wasn't even about survival. It was about the way one woman whispered into a radio when the world thought she was finished. "I have eyes on you. Stay low." That whisper carried them out of hell. That whisper became a lifeline. And for Cooper, that whisper was the essence of everything she had ever been. Not invincible, not mythical, but faithful. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And sometimes the strongest promise isn't shouted. It's kept in silence, one breath, one shot, one heartbeat at a time.